On a quiet summer night in Darlington, behind the closed doors of an ordinary family home, laughter echoed through a kitchen filled with the comforting smell of a home cooked meal until, in a single irreversible moment, everything shattered. What began as playful teasing between a mother and daughter slowly twisted into something darker, as irritation, alcohol, and a split-second decision collided with devastating consequences. Within minutes, sirens pierced the silence, blue lights flickered against rain-soaked streets, and a home once filled with warmth became the center of a chilling investigation. A 14-year-old girl lay lifeless, her father in handcuffs, and a single question hung heavily in the air. Was this truly a tragic accident, or something far more deliberate? If you're new, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications to stay updated. Let's begin. Have you ever considered how quickly the rhythm of daily life can disappear? When familiar voices, the comfort of home, and a sense of security vanish behind a single door in one night, never to return. What remains after an evening that ends not in silence, but in the wail of sirens? In the early hours of July 6th, 2024, on Geneva Road in Darlington, police vehicles arrived, their blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement as officers and crime scene technicians gathered at the gate of the Vickers family home. Specialists in protective suits moved through a narrow hallway, carrying the scent of disinfectant and metal. The yard had been sealed off, while a few passers-by stopped at the edge of the scene. Uncertain whether to speak, the neighbors looked on in silence. The night before had echoed with laughter from the house. Now, only brief commands from investigators and the click of a camera could be heard as they photographed the kitchen, the table, the dishes, and the scattered items. No one knew exactly what had taken place. Only one fact was certain: a 14-year-old girl had died at that home, on the front steps. Set Sarah. How? Her shoulders shook, yet no tears came, only a hollow shock. A paramedic draped a blanket over her as she stared blankly, unresponsive. Nearby stood Simon Vickers, his hands in cuffs, his gaze lowered. He was slowly escorted toward the police car without a word spoken. Inside the house, bags of evidence were being carried out. Kitchen utensils, clothing, and a cell phone. Each item was documented, every detail carefully recorded. All signs pointed to the night's outcome being far from a simple accident. And although no one yet understood exactly what had happened, one truth was already evident: laughter would never fill that house again. At the Vickers family home on Geneva Road on the evening of July 5th, 2024, the atmosphere had seemed typically calm. Simon returned from work around 7 p.m. and switched on the TV to watch a Euro 2024 match. A bottle of red wine sat before him, mostly consumed, alongside a hand-rolled cigarette containing hashish. He appeared relaxed, though noticeably subdued. In the kitchen, Sarah Howe was preparing dinner, macaroni boiling in a pot with meat sauce simmering in a pan. She moved swiftly, as usual, keeping track of the cooking process and timing. The family was accustomed to quiet evenings, TV, meals, and unhurried conversations. Their 14-year-old daughter, Scarlett, was in her room, scrolling through TikTok and chatting with friends, but she soon grew tired of the screen and came downstairs. It was around 10:15 p.m., and the kitchen was filled with the scent of tomatoes and spices. The girl came closer, told her mother she was bored, and began helping by tasting the sauce, joking as she did. Sarah played along, tossing a few grapes to her daughter, and a brief, light-hearted game began. Both of them laughed, unaware that Simon was becoming irritated. The noise and laughter made it difficult for him to focus on the game, drowning out the commentators' voices. He called out to them, asking them to stop, but his request was largely ignored. A few minutes later, still in a playful mood, Sarah approached her husband with a pair of kitchen tongs and lightly pinched his arm, expecting him to smile. Instead, Simon cried out sharply and pulled his arm away, saying it hurt. Scarlett, watching, smirked and told him not to take everything so seriously. That remark pushed him further. Under the influence, he lost control, turned toward the counter, and, without looking, grabbed an object nearby. Simon believed he had picked up the tongs, but instead he was holding a kitchen knife with a long, thin blade. The motion was impulsive. He swung his arm toward his daughter, driven more by frustration than any intention to harm, but the knife slipped from his grasp. The blade struck Scarlett's chest just below her left shoulder. The injury was severe, piercing her lung and grazing her heart. She collapsed to the floor immediately. In panic, Sarah rushed over, pressed a towel against the wound, and called out to her husband, who stood motionless, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Within seconds, she called emergency services. The crew arrived within minutes, and medics attempted life-saving efforts, but the injuries were fatal. At 11:50 p.m., the doctor pronounced her dead. The kitchen that had echoed with laughter moments earlier became the place where their daughter's life ended. After Scarlett's body was taken away, only the parents and officers from the Durham County Police remained inside. The scene was secured, and the kitchen was cordoned off with caution tape. Investigators observed no signs of a struggle. The dishes remained in place, the furniture was undisturbed, and nothing appeared to have been knocked over. Everything seemed normal, except for the blood on the tiles. Sarah sat on the couch, not crying or moving, her eyes distant. She responded to questions in short, single-word answers, as if she could barely hear them. Her blood pressure was low, and her speech was disorganized. Paramedics left her under the care of a police medic. Simon was taken into another room, his clothes stained with blood and his pupils dilated. He maintained that it was an accident, insisting he had picked up tongs, not a knife. When officers checked his breath, they detected a strong odor of alcohol along with signs of hashish use. The initial assessment concluded with the collection of the weapon, a kitchen knife with a metal handle found on the floor near the refrigerator. A photographer recorded the angle of the blade in relation to the body for later comparison with medical findings. The knife was sealed in a plastic container, and the report was completed step by step, noting the time of discovery. The number of people present and the parents' positions at the table were documented. An open bottle of wine and an ashtray containing the remains of a hand-rolled cigarette were recorded as potential evidence of substance use. The homicide detective arrived shortly after 1 a.m., and following a brief update, began questioning Simon in the presence of a public defender. Simon's responses were confused and inconsistent. He altered the sequence of events, misstated the timeline, and shifted between claiming the knife slipped and saying his daughter had come too close. These inconsistencies were immediately recorded in the report. Sarah provided her statements separately, offering only a partial match. She said Simon swung his arm without looking and that everything happened in a split second. After the interviews, the house was officially sealed. The parents were taken to the station for further questioning, marking a shift from a family tragedy to a criminal investigation. The home where dinner had just been prepared had become a crime scene. Every drop on the floor was treated as potential evidence that the incident might not have been accidental. On the morning of July 6, 2024, Simon Vickers was formally interviewed at the police station. Before the interrogation, a medical assessment confirmed signs of alcohol use, including the smell on his breath, an unsteady gait, and a blood alcohol level above the legal limit. Traces of cannabinoids were also detected. The report concluded that Simon was fit to speak, though with some cognitive impairment due to his condition. 2 detectives and a stenographer were present in the interview room. At first, Simon refused to talk, but when asked to explain what had happened, he eventually said it was a joke. "I didn't mean it." His account was inconsistent and unclear. He initially stated he had meant to throw kitchen tongs to the floor to break up an argument between his wife and daughter, but had grabbed the wrong item. Later, he said he had not thrown anything at all and that the knife simply slipped. The lead detective repeatedly pressed him to clarify the sequence of events. Simon became confused about the timeline, first saying he was sitting at the table, then later claiming he was standing near the TV. When asked where his daughter had been, his answers changed repeatedly, from by the door to near the stove to walking past. When shown photographs of the knife, he stared at the image for a long time before finally saying, "I thought it was the tongs." His statement was recorded exactly as spoken. Within the first 20 minutes, it was clear that his account conflicted with the forensic evidence. A medical expert consulted by phone confirmed that the wound's angle made an accident unlikely. This assessment was added to the preliminary report, raising serious doubts about the claim of an accident. After a short break, Simon again insisted he never intended to cause harm, describing the incident as a game that escalated. He also said he could not remember everything, attributing it to intoxication. When asked about his alcohol consumption, he stated he had drunk about a bottle of wine, or slightly less, and also mentioned using banned substances to relax. The detectives maintained a steady tone, carefully recording each inconsistency. Simon insisted that he loved his daughter and that they never argued. When questioned about the moment of the injury, he said, "I swung my arm without looking. Then she fell. It was over in a second." That statement was formally recorded as an admission of action by 4 a.m. The lead investigator informed Simon that his status was being changed from a witness to the incident to a suspect in the death of a child. Simon reacted with disbelief, repeating that he was not a killer. His court-appointed attorney requested that the interview be paused until the morning in a different office. At the same time, a formal report was being prepared to reclassify the case. It stated that the death of 14-year-old Scarlett Vickers was now considered suspicious, with evidence suggesting possible involvement of her father. A criminal case was opened on charges of homicide or involuntary manslaughter, pending forensic review. Simon was placed in a holding cell, and surveillance footage showed he was not aggressive. He simply sat with his head down, occasionally whispering she was just joking. Around 9 the next morning, investigators received the toxicology results, which confirmed a blood alcohol level of 0.14% along with traces of 3-CC, the psychoactive component of cannabis. These findings formed the basis for adjusting the charges to an act committed under the influence resulting in the death of a minor. That same day, a formal order was issued to keep Simon Vickers in custody until the investigation was complete. His rights were read to him, and he was informed that the case would now be taken over by the Major Crimes Unit. By this stage, the Vickers family story was no longer a private tragedy. It had become a criminal case in which a father who believed he had been involved in a terrible accident was now officially accused of causing his daughter's death. Simon Vickers and Sarah Howe lived in Darlington in a modest home on Geneva Road. He worked at a factory while she took shifts at a local shop. They married young and spent years hoping for a child, enduring a loss during pregnancy. Their wish was eventually fulfilled in 2010 with the birth of Scarlett. The family lived simply, without any known conflict or drama. Neighbors recalled them as quiet, peaceful people who often spent time together. Simon worked diligently while Sarah looked after the home, and their daughter was the focus of their lives. Scarlett grew up outgoing and full of energy, with teachers noting how easily she connected with others. She enjoyed social media and creating TikTok videos. At home, she helped her mother and occasionally had typical teenage disagreements with her father. However, she was usually the first to make amends. There were no records of violence or serious conflict within the family. Police checks revealed no previous calls to their address. Friends also confirmed that everything appeared normal. No one expected anything troubling could occur in that household, which is why the events of July 5th, 2024, came as a shock to all of Darlington. No one could believe that in a home known for peace and order, a tragedy had occurred that could never be undone. A few days after Simon Vickers' arrest, investigators began examining his past, and what they uncovered surprised even some family members. In 1993, Simon had previously been convicted in a case involving an assault with a Stanley knife. At the time, he was 19 years old. He became involved in a fight outside a bar in Darlington, and during the altercation, he cut another man's arm. The injury was not life-threatening, but the court found him guilty of assault with a weapon. Simon admitted responsibility and served a 2-year prison sentence. After his release, he avoided further legal issues, maintained steady employment, and was regarded by coworkers as a reliable worker. This newly uncovered history significantly influenced how investigators assessed Simon's behavior. What had initially seemed like a single tragic incident was now being viewed in the context of a previous case involving a bladed weapon. Prosecutors requested a psychological evaluation to determine whether Simon showed a pattern of impulsive behavior. The psychologist, who had previously worked with Simon during his prison sentence, described him as generally controlled and stable, but prone to sudden anger under stress or when under the influence of alcohol. In the 1990s, this assessment carried less weight, but 3 decades later it gained renewed significance. Investigators compared both incidents, noting similarities between past and present. In each case, a knife was involved and emotional tension was present. The key difference was the outcome. In 1993, the victim survived, while in 2024, a child died. Experts pointed to behavioral parallels, impulsive actions without premeditation, followed by immediate remorse. This discovery sparked debate within the investigative team. Some argued that a decades-old conviction should not influence the current case, while others believed it pointed to a possible pattern of behavior involving alcohol-fueled violent reactions. In the end, the decision was made to include Simon's prior conviction in the court materials. The psychological profile, based on interviews and expert evaluations, described Simon as someone who internalized his emotions. Outwardly calm, he was said to often harbor quiet frustration, rarely expressing complaints and avoiding direct conflict, yet gradually building up resentment. When intoxicated, he was considered more likely to lose control and react disproportionately to situations. Investigators reached a preliminary view that the events of July 5th may not have been a random accident, but instead the result of multiple contributing factors: alcohol, the influence of banned substances, and repressed aggression that had surfaced before. This information marked a turning point in the investigation after Simon's prior conviction came to light. His defense strategy began to weaken, and what was once considered a tragic accident was increasingly viewed as a criminal case involving a possible pattern of violent behavior. Following Simon Vickers' detention, the investigation shifted to the forensic phase, with the main focus on establishing precisely how and with what the fatal injury had been caused. The knife recovered from the scene was sent to the Durham Forensic Crime Lab for analysis. Specialists carried out a thorough examination and determined that the blade measured 7.6 inches in length and 0.87 inches in width. Simon Vickers' fingerprints were clearly found on the handle, and blood traces on the blade matched Scarlett's Dina. No additional fingerprints or biological evidence were identified. The analysis also confirmed that there were no signs of impact, damage, or scraping on the blade, ruling out the possibility of a random deflection or accidental ricochet. Particular attention was given to the angle and direction of the wound. According to experts, the knife entered the body at roughly a 40-degree angle with considerable force, creating a wound about 4.3 inches deep. It pierced the left lung and the heart, causing immediate and severe internal bleeding. Forensic specialists stressed that this type of trajectory was highly unlikely to result from an accidental throw. They concluded the motion appeared deliberate and carried out at close range. A 3D reconstruction of the kitchen was also created to simulate the scene, incorporating the furniture layout, the stab trajectory, and the relative heights of those involved. Investigators determined that Simon had been no more than 5 feet away from his daughter, effectively ruling out the possibility that the knife simply slipped from his hand during movement or was accidentally released. His blood test results confirmed the presence of alcohol and cannabinoids, though not at levels indicating a complete loss of motor control. Experts concluded that while his decision-making may have been impaired, his physical coordination remained intact, suggesting the arm movement was deliberate, even if impulsive. The autopsy on Scarlett Vickers supported the forensic conclusions. The wound was inflicted from the front at a downward angle and involved both a stab and slash component. The injury to the heart caused immediate circulatory failure. No defensive wounds were found on her arms, face, or body, indicating the attack was sudden and occurred during a moment of perceived safety and trust. The final report, signed by Durham's chief medical examiner, reached a key conclusion. The nature and force of the injury were not consistent with an accidental drop or slippage of the knife. It stated that the strike involved purposeful, controlled, directional movement of the hand. After receiving the report, the case was reclassified by Durham Police's investigative unit from suspicious death to intentional homicide without premeditation. The district attorney approved the updated charge and authorized the transfer of the case to the Major Crimes Division. The forensic findings became the decisive turning point in the investigation. Before their release, an accident ruling had still been considered possible. However, following a full review of the evidence, investigators concluded that the death of Scarlett Vickers resulted from an intentional act by her father. In the aftermath, Sarah Howe remained the only witness and the primary source of information for investigators. Her initial questioning took place in the hospital under the supervision of a psychologist. She was in shock, speaking in short phrases and repeatedly insisting the incident was a tragic mistake. Even after learning of her daughter's death and her husband's arrest, Sarah continued to defend Simon. She stated that he loved their child, had never been aggressive, and had never even raised his voice. In her account, he had simply made a fatal error that night, confusing the object in his hand. Investigators observed that Sarah refused to consider the possibility of intent and declined to review the official reports. Psychologists interpreted this as denial, a coping mechanism to maintain the perception of normal life. With time, Sarah came to accept that there was no return to the life she once knew. The loss of her daughter and the legal collapse of her husband's life shattered her world. After the trial, she left Darlington and severed contact with former neighbors. Both losses, the physical death of her child and the emotional breakdown of her relationship, became intertwined, taking away everything that had mattered to her. Darlington is a small town where news spreads faster than official statements. By the morning after the incident, local headlines read, "Man arrested after daughter's death on Geneva Road." The name Vickers was not released until several days later, but by then, the family's private life had already been publicly discussed in pubs, at bus stops, and in corner shops. People were not only talking about the child's death. They also brought up Simon's past, speculating about hidden family tensions that no one had known about. Opinions differed, but many people felt it was more than a freak accident. Newspapers published photos of the house, and neighbors were interviewed, often repeating the same line that the family had always seemed normal on social media. Sarah faced harsh criticism for standing by her husband, with some accusing her of silent complicity. Some residents even said she should leave Darlington so the town would not be reminded of what had happened. Sarah became completely isolated. Her employer at the shop ended her contract in public, on the street. People avoided her, crossing over to the other side when they saw her. She was labeled as the mother whose husband is accused of killing their child. Even months after Simon's arrest, the town continued to talk. Some described it as an accident, but most believed he was responsible for something irreversible. For Darlington, the Vickers tragedy became more than a headline. It became a dividing point in the town's collective conscience, showing how a single event can not only destroy a household, but also weaken the trust a community once placed in someone they thought they knew. The trial of Simon Vickers began in January 2025 at Teesside Crown Court. The charge was formally set as intentional homicide without premeditation, and the hearings attracted significant media attention. In his opening statement, the prosecutor outlined the events of July 5, 2024, in detail, stressing that Scarlett's death could not be considered an accident. This argument was supported by forensic analysis of Simon's actions, the presence of alcohol and traces of banned substances in his system, and his prior criminal record. The defense presented a very different account. Simon's attorney maintained that the incident was a tragic mistake made in a moment of intoxication and emotional confusion, without any intention to cause harm. He argued that Simon had always been a caring father with no history of conflict with his daughter. The defense asked the court to take into account his full cooperation, visible remorse, and the lack of evidence of premeditated violence. Expert witnesses were called to testify. The medical examiner stated that the nature of Scarlett's injuries made an accidental throw highly unlikely, and his testimony became a central element of the prosecution's case. Sarah Howe's statement added further tension in the courtroom. She described the events of the evening and the atmosphere in the home, and when directly asked by the prosecution whether her husband intended to harm their daughter, she said she did not believe so, but could not explain how the knife had come to be directed at Scarlett. Her testimony conflicted with expert findings, leading to debate between both sides. The judge had to interrupt her several times due to her emotional distress. When Simon took the stand, the courtroom was full. He spoke quietly, often pausing. He admitted to being intoxicated and having used hashish that night, but denied any intent to cause harm. He described the action as impulsive and claimed he had not realized he was holding a knife. "I loved my daughter more than life," he said. "If I could take back that second, I would give anything." During cross-examination, he struggled to explain why he picked up the knife or how it struck at such an angle. His tearful, shaking voice and demeanor affected some jurors, but the evidence presented in court remained unchanged. By the end of the proceedings, both sides had firmly established their positions. The judge informed the court that a verdict would be reached after jury deliberation. The nearly 2-week trial had become more than a legal dispute. It had turned into a public reckoning, marking the end of a story that began as a private tragedy and evolved into a broader symbol of loss and accountability. The final stage of the trial commenced on January 24th, 2025. The prosecutor reminded the jury that the fatal stab had been delivered at close range and argued that Simon Vickers knew he was holding a knife. He also referenced Vickers' prior conviction involving a knife. The defense maintained that the incident was a tragic mistake caused by intoxication and confusion, emphasizing that Vickers had immediately called emergency services and had not attempted to flee. He asked the court to acknowledge the absence of intent. The forensic report confirmed that the wound was deep and precise, but could not definitively establish whether Simon had been fully aware of his actions. A psychologist testified that Simon showed strong feelings of guilt and signs of emotional trauma. The courtroom remained silent, with Sarah sitting motionless and the jury appearing tense. In his final statement, Simon said quietly, "I loved her. I never wanted this to happen." The judge then dismissed the jury to deliberate on whether the incident constituted an accident or a crime. On January 31st, 2025, Teesside Crown Court found Simon Vickers guilty of murdering his daughter. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 15 years. The judge described Scarlett's death as the result of a reckless and destructive act by a man who had lost control. Sarah wept quietly in court, never raising her head. The judge offered condolences, making it clear that responsibility rested solely with the defendant. Media coverage described the verdict as a form of justice for a girl widely loved by those who knew her. After the trial, Sarah left Darlington to live with her sister. She avoided the press, kept to herself, and retained only a few of Scarlett's belongings. Vickers was transferred to Leeds Prison, where he remains under psychological observation in solitary confinement. The house on Geneva Road stood empty for a long time, its windows shuttered and weathered. Flowers and stuffed animals still hung from the gate, marking a place where a child's laughter once was. Now only silence remains, serving as the lasting reminder of what this family lost. In my opinion, this case sits in a deeply uncomfortable gray area where a moment of reckless impulsivity intersects with irreversible consequences. While there's no clear evidence of premeditated intent, the combination of alcohol, drug use, and a documented history of losing control under stress makes it difficult to accept. The narrative of a simple accident. The forensic findings, especially the force, angle, and proximity of the fatal wound, strongly suggest a conscious action, even if it was driven by sudden anger rather than calculated harm. What makes this tragedy especially disturbing is how ordinary everything seemed just minutes before, highlighting how quickly suppressed frustration and impaired judgment can turn lethal. In the end, regardless of intent, the responsibility lies with the person who chose to act in that moment, and the loss of a child under such circumstances feels less like misfortune and more like a preventable collapse of control.